Chapter 188.1 Grand Rules and Trifling Trivialities. The bamboo slips quietly lay on the mud wall between the courtyards, enjoying the warm sunshine of early spring with their master. At this moment, another uninvited guest arrived. Dong Xiujing. Back then, he had been unwilling to accompany his fellow classmates, Li Baoping and the others, to Great Sui Nation. The rustic young boy had turned down the opportunity to embark on a long journey to seek knowledge, and he had instead chosen to remain in the small town. Meanwhile, Shi Chunjia, the little girl with twin pigtails, had chosen to move to the capital with her family. It was from that moment onward that the final 5 students from Mr. Chi's private school had parted ways and scattered across the continent. After seeing that it was Dong Xiujing, Chen Ping'an hurriedly invited him in and told him to take a seat. The little girl in pink nimbly brought over some snacks and desserts. Dong Xiujing was slightly reserved and embarrassed, and it was as if he were a young student who had just made a mistake. It was as if he were sitting in a classroom and waiting for his teacher to punish him. However, Chen Ping'an genuinely didn't feel like it had been wrong for Dong Xiujing to make the decision to remain in the small town. One night during his journey to Great Sui Nation with the 3 children, Chen Ping'an had been called over by the cowardly Li Huai to take a shit together. While they chatted, Li Huai had told him about Dong Xiujing's background. Everyone said that while his mother had been pregnant with him, she had gone over to the iron lock well to draw water. Yet, she had surprisingly given birth to him while bending over. It was because of this that he was called Dong Xiujing 1. His classmates had all teased him about this, yet Dong Xiujing had never tried to explain anything. He had let them do as they pleased. Regarding the fact that both Dong Xiujing and Lin Xiaoyi liked Li Huai's older sister, Chen Ping'an was even more aware of this fact. However, he wasn't especially interested about whether this was true or false. A long time ago, his next-door neighbor had told him that the young masters in Fortune Street and Apricot Blossom Alley would already have mistresses and maidservants at their age. If it were a young master from Dragon Riding Alley, perhaps the matchmakers would already be helping them look for wives. If they were 1 or 2 years older, then they would have already become fathers. This was extremely normal in the small town. As for the poorest alleys like Clay Vase Alley, it would be possible for men to remain single all the way up until 30 or 40 years old. Dong Xiujing briefly told Chen Ping'an about the new private school in the small town, and Chen Ping'an told him some stories from his long journey to the Great Sui Nation. However, he didn't dare to mention the more bizarre events, and this was because he was afraid of Dong Xiujing overthinking things. After all, being an honest person didn't imply that Dong Xiujing was also a stupid person. After learning that the small town would have its own relay station in the future, Dong Xiujing asked Chen Ping'an for the address of Great Sui Nation's Mountain Cliff Academy. The young boy was very happy, and he said that he would definitely write letters to Li Baoping and the others in the future. Chen Ping'an was slightly hesitant. Sending letters and items was equivalent to sending gold and silver. Now that Dong Xiujing was alone and helpless, he wouldn't necessarily be able to bear the cost of sending letters. However, Chen Ping'an ultimately decided against saying anything. Instead, he simply made a mental note in his mind. Dong Xiujing left with a happy smile on his face. The little boy in azure clicked his tongue in wonder and remarked, "That stupid boy was a fairly decent person. I initially thought that he was coming over to shamelessly ask for a free meal, if he had dared to do so." He subconsciously looked at Chen Ping'an before swallowing the words that had already reached the tip of his tongue. He changed tack and continued, "Then I would have kindly encouraged him against such actions. I would have definitely explained the reasons and principles to him and advised him to put himself in the shoes of others." Chen Ping'an smiled and patted the little boy's head. "Then I'll have to trouble you if it comes to that." On the 2nd day of the new year, it was customary for people in the small town to visit their friends and family to wish them a happy new year. Chen Ping'an didn't have any relatives, so he decided to bring the little boy and the little girl to Downtrodden Mountain. Downtrodden Mountain was located in the southwestern region of Dragon Spring Prefecture, and beside it were 3 other mountains of varying heights. However, these mountains were all far smaller than Downtrodden Mountain. They were Jumping Fish Mountain, Rapid Rise Foothill, and Heavenly Capital Peak. They had all been bought by immortal forces from outside the Great Lee Empire, and in order to construct impressive and unique residences on them, they had remained busy with construction both day and night before New Year's Eve. When Chen Ping'an and the two little children walked past Heavenly Capital Peak today, the mountain had finally become quiet. During the past year, all kinds of strange and extravagant structures had appeared on the mountains: mansions and temples, pavilions and pagodas, courtyards and towers, scenery viewing platforms, long bridges that hung between two mountains, and so on. These were all breathtaking structures. As for Chen Ping'an's downtrodden mountain, it appeared relatively empty and quiet even though it was much larger than the surrounding mountains. This was because almost all of the constructions were being completed by the Great Lee Empire only. Meanwhile, as the owner of the mountain, Chen Ping'an wasn't funding any additional construction. This was the case with Downtrodden Mountain, which enjoyed the presence of a mountain god, so the situation was naturally even worse in Treasured Scripture Mountain, Rainbow Cloud Mountain, and Immortal Herb Mountain. These mountains were empty and lifeless, and the cultivators responsible for overseeing the constructions on the nearby mountains couldn't help but find it amusing every time they looked over at their neighboring mountain. This person was rich enough to buy mountains, yet they were too poor to develop these mountains. This was far too absurd. When Chen Ping'an and the two little children neared Downtrodden Mountain, Wei Bo mysteriously appeared in front of them again. Chen Ping'an handed Wei Bo a small pouch, inside of which was a top-quality snake gall pebble. The young boy asked Wei Bo to help him hand this snake gall pebble to the black python from Go Table Mountain. Wei Bo smiled and accepted this lucky money, saying that he would definitely bring it to the black python. He promised that he wouldn't steal it. They walked up the mountain together, and Chen Ping'an asked Wei Bo about the new private school in the small town. Wei Bo naturally knew more than Dong Xuejing, so he gave a detailed explanation to Chen Ping'an. As it turned out, this was a clan private school set up by the Dragon Tail Creek Chen clan. However, it was open to everyone, and it was completely free of charge as well. In fact, even the children of prisoners and refugees from the Liu Empire could attend this private school. This decision had been equivalent to saving dozens of lives. Otherwise, it would have been anyone's guess whether those skinny and malnourished children could have made it past last winter. As Dragon Spring Prefecture became increasingly prosperous, many clans started to move over from the neighboring states and prefectures. A fair number of them were large and powerful clans that were both wealthy and great in number. These clans spent huge sums of money to snap up houses and land in and around the small town, and they naturally prioritized the large residences on Fortune Street and Peach Leaf Alley. And now, many of the old residences in Dragon Riding Alley and Peach Leaf Alley were changing owners as well. In one short year, the private school had already grown to over 100 students. All of the teachers in the school were also renowned literati and scholars. After explaining all this, Wei Bo smiled and asked, "Do you feel like these people are using a sledgehammer to crack a nut? Why are these proud and conceited scholars willing to leave their hometown and come here to suffer? Moreover, why are they willing to teach a bunch of children and youths?" Chen Ping'an nodded and replied, "Is it because the Dragon Tail Creek Chen clan offered them a lot of money?" Wei Bo roared with laughter. He waved a hand and explained, "This genuinely has nothing to do with money. Among those well-read scholars, 2 of them are virtuous persons. As such, how can they be swayed by money? No, these people are hoping to enter Cloud Drape Mountain. Why? Because an interesting place called Forest Deer Academy is about to appear there." The little boy in azure interjected and asked, "You said that you lived in Cloud Drape Mountain before, so were you perhaps doing odd jobs at Forest Deer Academy?" "Shoo, shoo, shoo, go and find some shade somewhere else. I'm discussing extremely important and profound matters with your master." Wei Bo waved his sleeve to shoo the little boy away. After a while, he continued, "In fact, even blind people can see that the Great Lee Empire is planning something big. After all, Forest Deer Academy is a clear competitor to Great Sway Nation's Mountain Cliff Academy. Once the Great Lee Empire succeeds in its expedition down south, and once Great Sway Nation's Gao clan is destroyed, the 2 quotas that Eastern Treasured Vile Continent has for the 72 Confucian Academies will definitely go to Lakeview Academy and Forest Deer Academy. Thus, the earlier one enters Forest Deer Academy, the more likely one will be able to become a dragon-aiding official. Dragon-aiding and dragon-following differ by just one character, yet the gulf between them is as immense as the gulf between heaven and earth. However, this can't be helped. If a scholar wants to realize their ambition and benefit both their nation and its people, then they must first gain a seat in the imperial court. Otherwise, their theories and ideas will be nothing more than empty words. Of course, if one fails to squeeze themselves into the imperial court, then they can also take a step back and cultivate their own moral character. Refining their own knowledge isn't a bad choice, and they can also choose to spread their teachings and educate the masses, thereby guiding society in a positive direction. Compared to the former choice, however, this is naturally a duller and more lonesome path. Weibo was nonchalant as he said this, and as he continued to climb up the mountain, his 2 large sleeves swayed back and forth like 2 white clouds hovering toward the mountain peak. The little girl in pink couldn't take her eyes off this. Carrying the small green bookcase on her back, she was imagining a future where her own master would also become this graceful and outstanding. Weibo, are you a mountain god now? Chen Ping'an suddenly asked. A knowing smile appeared on Weibo's face, and he replied, Chen Ping'an, I've been waiting for you to ask this the entire time. The little boy in azure pursed his lips. There was a scornful expression on his face. Mountain god. And I'm the brother of a great river god. Weibo raised a hand and pointed at Cloud Drape Mountain before continuing. Right now, I'm temporarily the mountain god of Cloud Drape Mountain. As he walked beside the little girl in pink, the little boy in azure secretly started to bob his head and act up. If everything goes according to plan, Cloud Drape Mountain will soon be specially promoted to the northern mountain of the Great Li Empire, Weibo added. Chen Ping'an stopped and asked, Northern Mountain, shouldn't it be the Southern Mountain? Weibo shook his head and replied, No, it's the Northern Mountain. Wow, the little girl in pink exclaimed. Her eyes were filled with admiration. The formal god of one of the 5 mountains. This was a genuinely impressive and lofty position. Moreover, this was a formal god of the 5 mountains from the Great Li Empire. The little boy in azure gulped and moistened his throat. He then quickly walked to Weibo's side and looked up with a smile. Esteemed immortal Wei, are you tired from the trek? Do you need to sit down and rest? Do you want me to massage your shoulders and legs for you? Weibo smiled with squinted eyes and exclaimed, Oh, why aren't you scoffing at me anymore? The little boy in azure put on a righteous expression and declared, Esteemed immortal Wei, you're good friends with my master, and I'm also part of master's family. In that sense, the 2 of us can be considered as half friends as well, right? Is this a suitable inference, esteemed immortal Wei? Weibo reached over to pinch the little water snake's cheek. He didn't hold back, and he commented, How naughty. There was a stiff smile on the little boy's face. However, he didn't dare to resist. There was no other option. If Weibo were telling the truth, then both he and his master were subject to his whims now. Regardless of how many mountains Chen Ping'an owned, he would need to obey Weibo's whims as long as he remained in Dragon Spring Prefecture. As the lofty formal god of one of the 5 mountains, Weibo could cause all of the mountains in his territory to quake with just a single sneeze. If he wanted to, it would be extremely easy for him to manipulate spiritual energy, dig up mountain roots, and do many other things. Moreover, he could do all of these things without anyone else noticing. Weibo smiled and asked, A lot is going on in Divine Elegance Mountain, and works haven't ceased even to this day. Chen Ping'an, do you want to head over to take a look? It's extremely interesting. Chen Ping'an was fairly eager, and he nodded earnestly and replied, Sure thing. I've always wanted to go there to check things out. Weibo whistled, and it wasn't long before a loud rumble traveled over from somewhere in the mountain. After a while, a gigantic black python with a golden line on its belly slithered over and appeared before their eyes. The little boy in azure and the little girl in pink were both feeling slightly nervous. It was extremely common for species related to flood dragons to cannibalize each other. and this black python had already made genuine progress in cultivation and was displaying signs that it had the aptitude to become a flood dragon in the future. When it came to the numerous descendants of flood dragons who had complicated bloodlines, many of them were unable to assume even an inkling of a flood dragon's form, even if they had advanced to the 7th or 8th tier and could already assume a human form. In fact, this was the case even for some powerful 9th tier descendants. The little boy in Azure always made the excuse that their cultivation relied on talent and aptitude, and that he wasn't slacking off or being lazy. In reality, he was indeed half correct. Weibo tossed the small pouch to the black python and said, "This is some lucky money from Chen Ping'an. There's no hurry to eat it, and we're going to need you to take us to Divine Elegance Mountain first." The eyes of the black python were extremely calm, and there wasn't the slightest hint of conflict or resistance inside them. It slowly lowered its head, displaying sufficient gentleness and goodwill. The 4 people stood on the body of the black python as it slithered over Downtrodden Mountain and descended from the north. During this time, the black python carefully navigated its way around the mountain god temple. After leaving Go Table Mountain and arriving at Downtrodden Mountain, the initially violent black python had already become far calmer than before. It was abundantly clear that this was largely thanks to Weibo. They rapidly traveled through the mountains, and at one point, the white-robed Weibo pointed at a group of people standing at the foot of a mountain and explained with a smile, "Those are Mohist disciples who are extremely skilled at mechanisms, and there are also a few naturalists who are skilled at geomancy and feng shui. These people have all been invited into the large mountains in Dragon Spring Prefecture." These 2 groups of disciples often appear together, and the cooperation between them is also absolutely seamless. Indeed, these people are critical and always required when it comes to constructing immortal abodes and mountain god temples. Afterward, they saw several large gray toads with bloated bellies that were as white as snow slowly dawdling up a mountain. As it turned out, these were river-swallowing toads that could hold tens of thousands of liters of water in their bellies. After reaching their destination, they simply needed to open their large mouths in the direction of the excavated pool. Water would then continuously rush from their bellies into the pool. There was also a type of smaller toad, and these were called path-clearing toads. Their bellies were extremely tough, and as they crawled along, they could flatten the ground underneath them and create a wide and flat mountain path. However, even though Weibo told them about the young mountain-moving apes being raised by the imperial court of the Great Li Empire, Chen Ping'an and the 2 little children weren't able to personally see them this time. When passing Yellow Flower Peak, Chen Ping'an and the others encountered a group of Taoist priests who were busy ordering several golden-armored warriors around, getting them to excavate the mountain and transport huge rocks. As it turned out, it was almost impossible not to rely on Taoist talisman cultivators when it came to constructing immortal abodes. These cultivators could transform their talismans into puppets with enough intelligence to understand some crude and basic commands. These puppets would then act upon these commands without needing to rest or sleep, all the way until they exhausted their spiritual energy. At that time, they would automatically transform into a pile of paper ashes. 1. Xiojing literally means well.